It's time for the show about the people and the places of the Carolinas with the occasional visitors. In addition to hosting the award-winning syndicated TV show Life in the Carolinas, Carl White writes a weekly syndicated column and now hosts this weekly show, the Life in the Carolinas podcast. Now you can hear the story about the stories. And now, here's your host, Carl White.
Welcome to the Life in the Carolinas podcast, Karen.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I know who you are, but why don't you tell all of our listeners and viewers who you are?
Absolutely. I am Karen Swank Kustafik, and I work with the city of Columbia, South Carolina. I work with our parks department, managing our greenway parks. The city is really, really fortunate to have miles of greenway along our three rivers, on the Saluda River, the Broad River, and the Congaree River. And this is just a spectacular green space where we are increasingly focused on linking those greenways together to become one contiguous section.
I love that. I think as we are, it's always funny to say as we're moving forward, as we're advancing, as we're improving, knowing a bit about nature and about our history, we've always, as a people, we've gotten life energy from the rivers, right? The water always brings something. And when we, the people, spend time with nature, we're better, aren't we?
Absolutely. There is increasing research that shows the health benefits, reduced cortisol from as little as 15 minutes outside. It doesn't have to be active recreation. Of course, we all think about running and walking for miles, and that is without a doubt beneficial, but you can lower stress hormones. You can feel better with just 15 minutes sitting on a bench, looking at an expanse of nature, looking at green, listening to the river flow. All of that time outdoors, we're wired for that, and increasingly our work days and habits keep us isolated from that. And when we return to time outdoors, we feel better.
Yes. I think we don't talk about that enough, do we?
No.
I know we don't do it enough. Some of us do it. I think for me, I guess we all have that piece of our life, no matter how much our responsibilities have us focused on the outside of doing for others. There's a time in our life when we look at ourselves a little bit more, right? Whether it's health situation, an accident, or some type of a family loss. There's a moment where the idea, whether we call it mindfulness or not, but there's a moment when something happens that we self-discover mindfulness, that idea of sitting on the park bench, that idea of, I remember when I first heard the popular conversations about grounding. And I was like, grounding? And then I went to a symposium about grounding. And that was the big part of it. It was about other things, but it was all about nature, connecting with nature. And the idea of walking barefoot outside. And I was like, I remember as a kid, how great that, we did that all the time, right? We always would do that. And then why did we get away from that? And I don't know, how was it for you growing up?
The same way. I'm fortunate to have grown up in the hillsides of rural Pennsylvania, and I was just outdoors all day. And so, yes, I poked around in creeks and built rock dams and walked to the top of a small mountain and thought that I was the first person to ever see this vista. But, one of the neat things that I get to do with my job is get children outdoors. And so especially in the summer, we do kayak camps. So we've got these rivers, and ideally we'll connect children and their families. So all these bridges that they drive over daily, going back and forth, by the end of a camp experience, our kids can say, oh, I went under that, and I went under this one, and I know where that goes. I've been there. But watching the children during camp, they have free time on their hands, and you can tell that they're not, during the week, we'll take a break where everybody just stops and swims, and they start to free play. And that's not a luxury, I think, that you and I might have had growing up, but children today don't always get. And so they'll can I go over to that rock over there? May I, do this? And next thing you know, they're halfway across a river. They've all got their PFDs on. They're good, but they're exploring. This is my rock. I'm naming this, and they invent games and all of those.
The
things.
Imagination comes alive.
Exactly,
right?
Because they've got downtime. They don't have something in front of them. I try to absolutely, even with the older teen groups that we take out, try to prevent them from putting their phones in their dry bags,
right?
And letting them.
What do you tell them? Talk to me. I'm one of the kids. Why is that important? What is downtime?
Well, downtime, I don't so much preach it that way because I don't want to come off that way, but your phone, I am not responsible for your phone, and it's very likely that it will become damaged and wet and dead.
Right.
And
don't want that happening.
Right. So often that's enough.
Okay.
But we frown on it. I'm not taking my phone out on the river, and so we model that.
Okay.
And there's plenty of challenges. We've got a variety of still water and moving water, and so our camp experience progresses from by the end of the week they're in whitewater, and so even if we're taking a break, we might have them swimming a small rapid to learn kind of a whitewater self-rescue technique. So we try to keep them so active that they're not reaching for that phone out of automatic boredom too.
How long have you been working with that type of program?
23 years, going on 24.
Okay, so it was a flip phone when you started.
It wasn't.
Or
yeah. Well, it was, and I
at least they still have
soggy flip phone in my pocket. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I came to my work through. I fell in love with whitewater kayaking when my son was 10, a very long time ago. He and I tried that. We've got great groups in and around Columbia and in the Carolinas who are really advocates for paddle sport. There's plenty of them. Palmetto Paddlers, a club, Whitewater 101, where I live, and there's folks in the Low Country, and up here the Carolina Canoe Club. Fabulous people. So anybody who wants to get into it should look up a local club and mentor. Well, we did this, and I was absolutely terrible at kayaking.
Tell me the success stories. Share with us, if you would, some of those transformative moments that you've seen happen.
Well, I've got my own.
Okay.
In that I was absolutely terrible at it. I could not roll my kayak. In a whitewater, you're tucked in with your spray skirt, and you need to be able to self-rescue. And I had a really difficult time translating that motion and got passed around from various instructors. But after a couple months, I had a solid roll. And there was a night that I was catching eddies. You don't run a rapid just hurtling from the top to the bottom. You dissect it, you break it down, eddy by eddy, move by move, and bit by bit. And I was at the top of a rapid one night in August, and I was just washed with peace. It was a noisy environment. The horn was blowing. It's a dam-released river, and the horn signifies that the power company is releasing more water. So there was the cacophony of the rapid, then was the noise of the horn, and a train was going by just for the cherry on top of all of that.
Right.
But I was eddied out at the top of Mill Race, and I just was washed with peace. There was this gorgeous sunlight setting, gilding the river, and it was like hallelujah, the angels were singing. It was just a peaceful moment. I realized, you know what, I can do this. I've got this. I'm moving from here, and I'm going over there, and then I'm going to go over to Square Eddy, and I'm going to catch this, and I'm going to surf a little bit right here. I felt good, and it just translated to me, there are other things that I thought I couldn't do that I can do. I just have to break it into eddies, into those smaller bits.
Right, and take it a piece at a time.
And so the next morning, I contacted Midlands Tech. I enrolled in school. I had gone straight from high school to the workforce, and I, eventually got my degree, transferred from Midlands Tech, went to school to the University of South Carolina, and I focused on, I've fallen in love with rivers, and you can't help when you're a paddler, but you can't help become an advocate for water quality and river access and many of those other things. And so I just kind of grew into all of that through hey, this would be fun, let's do that. with my son, and it's really changed our lives for the better. And I can see that with a lot of our kids too. Over the years, we've taught scores and scores of children to kayak. Or just getting adults out who are, some of my coworkers have asked me to take them to the river, and they don't swim, and they're terrified. So we work through this step at a time. What's the worst thing that, what are you afraid of? What is the worst thing that's going to happen to you? You're going to fall out of your boat? Let's do that right now while I'm watching. Let's just float with your PFD, with your life jacket. Okay, you're good, right? We've got this. And you work through those things. You address them one at a time, and
those
that's
things,
powerful.
Those things you're talking about, those are fears, real fears.
Absolutely.
Right?
And there's just, water or not, so many people are afraid of the outdoors sometimes. They're snakes. I'm terrified of snakes. I won't come. You've got alligators in the canal. I don't want to walk there. And so to make the outdoors a welcoming space, and I work with people. I work with park rangers, and we get to do that, through a guided hike, or whether it's just giving our on-duty phone number to somebody. We're right here if you need us. Our parks have lights at night, and we're safe. We focus on making people feel welcome and safe.
So truly, you are spending a portion of your life talking with people about their primal fears that probably started in childhood. Don't touch that snake. Don't touch the well, I guess you would have some places. Don't touch the alligator. Well, they just look mean, right? But it's that separation of us, two-legged walking creatures, and being afraid of all the others, right?
Right.
Anytime you add more than two legs, it's like there's some sort of a fear. Whether it's a spider, or you take the legs away, a snake, or 4 legs, alligator, whatever it might be.
Sure.
Isn't it interesting that this part of life, just like we are, I know we're not alligators, but we're still all living creatures, living beings. Right?
And some of this fear is programmed into us, and we're all here because our ancestors got away from the snakes and some of the bugs and stuff like that. But a lot of that is taught, and so to try to overcome it. To explain that these insects have a purpose. They're breaking down, these beetles are breaking down detritus. If these are the garbage haulers of the forest, and they're recycling all this for us and providing food for the base of the food chain. And look at that bird. Isn't that magnificent? It depends on this beetle, to show those relationships. That starts to instill a sense of place.
Right.
So after we share these stories with people that come out, the neatest thing is to observe them maybe telling somebody else. Sometimes we'll post up in the park and we're there for information, but I'll hear other people explaining something about our park to their guests, their families and friends, and that's really gratifying. We are so fortunate into Columbia. We've got really rich natural history and cultural history, right? We are a fall line city, so there were industrial settlements, the mills that came, and the hydroelectricity and all of that. And, we've got those old historic waterwork buildings at Riverfront Park. And I can stand down there on a weekend, and people will come. It's an iconic spot. People will take pictures, family pictures, graduation, prom. People get married there. But you'll also see them hauling their out-of-town guests, especially around the holidays. We're open every day of the year. So, day after Thanksgiving, day after Christmas, my goodness. We're just packed. Sometimes if the weather's wonderful, everybody's got their new bikes, but you see groups from out of town as well, and they look over here. That's where the rivers come together. There's a neat spot on the Saluda River Walk where you can very plainly see the confluence. The Broad flows into the Saluda, and the Broad carries all the clay soil and the silt from the upstate. It is muddy. Right. Anytime you look at the imagery there, you see this muddy, muddy river. But the Saluda runs clear because Lake Murray above us, above the confluence, filters that out for the large part. And so you will often see these two rivers, and we've got this spot right beside one of our most beautiful park features at Boyd Island. where this confluence line is
You can
very
see them both,
distinct.
right?
You see very clear Saluda, very muddy Broad, and they meet.
How many people come just to see that? Because that is a phenomenon
Well,
in
they
nature.
don't necessarily come to see it because they don't know it's there. But it's really fun to go, you know what that is? You know what you're seeing?
Right.
And then it is. It's like my favorite Heraclides quote, you can never stand in the same river twice. It changes that universal constant, and this spot is always in a slightly different location.
Karen, what would Columbia have been without the rivers?
Fields, pine forest, pine plantation, or fields, right? But because we are right there, where we initially, when European people started to settle, but before them, it was still a trading center for Native people. The Cherokee Trail runs along the western bank of the Congaree and up the Saluda up into the upstate, but the Congaree later joined up with the Catawba natives. But there were definitely Native peoples settled along the rivers, and they were more migratory. Sometimes they would go to one area during the summer and then come in seasonally. But as European people settled, this was as far as they could come upriver from Charleston before that the fall line and the rapids stopped them. And so we settled there, as first Granby actually on the western side of the river, and then as that became a little bit flood prone and mosquito problem, the higher ground of Columbia was settled and eventually became the state capital. But that fall, that drop in elevation made it possible for a number of things, mills, of course, but then Robert Mills, the state architect, of course, Columbia had one of 13 canal systems that he oversaw, and ours was completed in 1824. We're about to celebrate its 200th anniversary this year.
And his work was celebrated in a very broad sense as well, right?
Oh, absolutely.
He had a significant
courthouses all over and the Washington Monument, but Robert Mills and Abram Blanding were huge in the development of Columbia and our first waterworks as well. Blanding got a steam-powered machine from Scotland, and he pumped water from springs in Finley Park up to the top of Arsenal Hill, and that was the city's first water system. It was private. He later sold it at a loss, I believe, to the city, and we took over water distribution. But there's an account of someone who visited from Charleston expecting Columbia to be a bit of a backwoods cow town, and writing to their family that we had running water and hot baths, So
it was a happening place, right?
But yeah, the navigation, we are where we are because of the rivers, because of the fault line.
When you look at Columbia, you look at all the people who live there, all the people who visit. Are you mindful of that your responsibility is for a very large group of people, not just residents, but those who visit, and the impact that your work has on the youth and the community at large, and why that's important? Talk about that, if you would.
Well, it's a joy. It's just the one of the best things about working in a park or being a park ranger is that people understand that we're there and can come up. I guarantee you, if I'm just standing there, someone will come up. Well, let me ask you this. And that's the way so many really satisfying days begin. And that's just with resident people in our park regulars, and whether we're giving them, hosting programs with a toddler hike or a winter solstice lantern parade where we talk about, the shortest day of the year and everyone comes together and we light lanterns and walk down into the park. But with our visitors, and you can tell when people are coming from out of town too, because they have that look around when they're leaving, coming into your trailhead. But for when the NCAAs, for instance, were in town, and I had hundreds of conversations that day because people had time in between games and came down into the park. So it's really neat to be able to show off what we've got to visitors. And when we're sharing it with our residents, it's establishing that sense of place. with everyone. This is our home.
Have you seen a change or an evolution of people coming to the park, coming to have this experience, to where you see more people sitting on the benches just with their eyes closed and listening? Are you seeing your society there begin to move a little bit more toward that center of peace?
Yes. Whether it's passive or active, but people are definitely embracing the park. And we've got regulars who are there before we open up at 6 in the morning, who, document their day on social media and share it with other people who may be homebound, but feel that duty to come out daily in freezing cold and rain,
right,
and walk and take a list of the wildlife that they saw. One of the really valuable things, we're in a very urban area, but the river corridor is largely forested, and we're wonderful to have this great riparian corridor, this green infrastructure, right? This is what should be along the banks of a river. So we're fortunate that a lot of that area was not developed, partly because it was in hydroelectric project boundaries,
right,
and wasn't available, and partly because some of it is in floodplain. But that area is so important for wildlife. So we've got herds of deer, and we've got active beavers, and plenty of muskrats, and just the bird population, right? We've got a pair of nesting bald eagles in the confluence. Plenty ospreys are building nests right now, and the migratory birds that depend on this habitat. And you go just not even within a mile outside, and you are in impervious surface and in city streets and all the rest of it. But it's often a surprise just how wild you can be within a stone's throw of the State House. It's pretty neat.
Are you seeing a resurgence of interest in that aspect? Because what you're describing is truly a step back at history. I mean, those animals would have been there then, right? They would have. This is the natural habitat, and to have that coexist with all the asphalt.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Well, it is amazing, and I think people really take a sense of ownership. When they realize it's there, they get protective. And so these are our citizens who are showing up to advocate for more Greenway connection, for protecting our river resources, who will show up at agency hearings regarding water quality.
Right.
You become a stakeholder. When you really connect with nature, then you also become an advocate. And we see this very clearly when there were recent plans announced for some development along one of our greenways. The developer was a little bit taken aback because there was a public backlash. We don't need this here.
Right.
Keep those trees,
because of that purpose. Do you think for those who have been opposed to, keeping that developer from doing it there, okay, do it over here instead of there because of this reason is bigger for all of us? Are we seeing in Columbia, I know we are in certain parts of the Carolinas and in the nation, we do see a sensitivity of the value of that idea of being able to go out and put your bare feet on some dirt.
Yeah.
It almost sees, though, Karen, that there's a very keen interest from people who need that for health reasons, right? So it's almost like there's a point you can go along your life and not utter the words grounding, mindfulness, meditation, tranquility.
Forest
you're
bathing.
Busy. Yeah. You're busy because we're busy doing things, right? We're busy, and then something happens and stops us in our tracks. And then we need to do that. Yeah. The doctor writes a prescription. Let's go take a walk. I think I shared with you earlier before we rolled that my cardiologist and I became good friends, and we were talking about things that needed to happen. And I did all of those things and more because I continued to learn. But that was a big part of it. He said to me, Carl, you've got to handle stress better. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a producer. Well, we got to get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, but you can't let it. You cannot let it stress you. You can't, that's your enemy. That will kill. That kills people every day.
Yeah.
I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And he said, he's from Trinidad, and he has a broad. I don't know if it's a broad reaching. I don't think it's we all are affected by where we come from, what our experiences were. But he said he had seen hundreds and thousands of patients, and those who were able to tap into this idea, make themselves do it. But then once they did, and once you discover the power of that release, the power of, he told me something, Karen, I never will forget this. And it literally changed my life. And I was in the middle of getting, this has been some years ago now, and I had AFib and still do that a little bit, but I had congestive heart failure.
Yeah.
And I've talked public about it. And I had my cardiologist on. We've talked about it because he told me, he said, Carl, he said, people who present to the ER for heart conditions in rural community, that's the largest economic drain on community because everybody gets taken care of. And if it's a heart thing, you're at the highest level of care. So you're getting the most expensive care, the most attention, and oftentimes if it's a chronic condition and you don't know, you're not aware, like, if your heart races, you can freak out, in the beginning stage because you're like, oh no, it's bad.
Right.
Well, it's just, you got to calm down, take it, do your stuff. But learning how to do that was life-changing for me. And I was listening to a speaker, and he was talking about starting your morning by going out, and as soon as the sun comes up, be there when the sun comes up. And that was really important in his messaging. And just go and stand in your yard. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a yard, go to a park, go somewhere that nature is. Karen, I did this. I was doing it. I was pushing myself. I felt a little silly. But I went out one day, and I stood in my yard, and I heard birds talking. And then I heard the wings of this bird. I was like, that sounds like bird wings.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, the fluttering.
Yeah.
And I was like, is a moth in my ear? I mean, literally, I checked myself to say, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
And that was 4 years ago. I experience that every morning when I go out, and it's early. Now, you got to be at the early because you get to hear them talk, and you hear those things. You hear the squirrels chirping and talking to each other and having a battle, and that was life-changing for me. And I had never had that experience in my life, and I was 54 when that happened. And I was like, wow, that would have been cool,
right.
if I'd had that all my life. Have you ever had that happen?
There have been so many gifts outdoors, and the trick is there's a discipline to getting up at sunset. But even if you're not getting at sunrise,
right.
Even if you're not getting up, then to just go out and observe. Try to make that part of it, and it. It's ideally you can find a great park, and we've got plenty of them. But you're right. If it's just a little backyard space, if it's a rooftop, if you've pulled over on a drive, gifts will appear. And this happens all the time when we're outdoors. There have just been times when I've been out with a group and I had maybe an agenda. I was going to lead a history tour, but nature was taking over the lead. Instead, when you look up and, there's an eagle fighting an osprey for a fish.
Oh, sure.
Or a time that we took a tour for people from a nursing home who were shut-ins. We got a bunch of golf carts, and we were giving them a drive down the greenway. And along the way, there's a little rough green snake hanging from the edge of a branch that we could practically touch. So there are always gifts in the bird wings and the flutters. If you're doing that practice daily, you will see the seasons change. The sun is rising in an incrementally different spot until you reach the winter solstice, and then it swings back toward the summer solstice. Just being quiet and thinking, focusing on what you're seeing in front of you instead of reaching to pick up your phone or worrying about that meeting at 10 o'clock that you might get in trouble for, or the deadline, the paperwork you didn't finish. Just and it's a practice. It's this mindfulness. You're right. That's where you fix your AFib, and that's where you come to realize that moment of empty quiet is really something that you need. That should be your new habit.
Yes. And you discover, for me, I discovered this is so much bigger than me. It's so much bigger than the chatter that we have in our lives and in our head. My dog walks with me now in the morning. So he's a French bulldog. And we out walking. It may sound weird, but as I'm walking, we stop a lot, and he stops. And I just listen because I'm hearing the birds or the squirrels, or because it's early in the morning, because I'm out in the country, so I can hear, the cattle in a 2 miles away, they're bellowing, or everything is waking up. But we have lots of trees. I hear lots of squirrels, and I'll stop and I say, Shiloh, squirrel, and he stops now too.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works from, human canine, but we're both alive. We're all, part of creation. And literally, we both stop. I stop, he stops. I listen, and I can tell, he looks up, because the squirrels are over there talking to each other. At certain times of the year. It is different at different times of the year. But whether it's warm, whether it's cold, it's still a unique experience.
Isn't that neat to tie that in with your dog, too?
Because fantastic.
They know.
I think so. It's all part of...
Well, his ancestors fetched small game for their people, I'm sure.
That's right.
They're used to being useful,
Absolutely.
And you're telling him, look, focus on this.
That's right. Now, Shiloh, of course, has me fetch everything for him to eat.
He's got it figured out. But
he has me well trained, but it's that idea... And, even that idea of a pet, I don't think of him as, something that I own or something that I think I'm a custodian. Mm-hmm. And if he lives in the house, he is a member of the household. So navigating that water, I think that's why it's important for people to make their choices wisely. So if you have a home that needs to be peaceful, you don't need to have, a pet that's just a wild animal, Yeah. And I don't mean wild animal as an ape, technical wild animal, but just a dog that's, if you've got a small place, if you've got a small place, do not get an English Shepherd. Do not get a dog
Border
that needs,
right.
Do not get a Great Pyrenees and put it in a small apartment and expect it to even be healthy, because it can't. That's not why he lives. So, having some degree of logic there is important, but just this idea of connecting, the idea of taking time. When you and I met, we met in a creative environment with a mutual friend, and you're making this beautiful art, and what do? We had conversation, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. We need to talk about, share more stories. Number one, about our friends in South Carolina and Columbia. I hadn't been there in a while, and I said, oh, you're a connection.
Yeah.
And so let's do... I don't look at what you and I are doing now as in our work cycle. I look at this as our service to mankind, to our service to our fellow citizens, because sharing this message about the wonders of our creation, our environment, our homes, and the people we share it with, I think it's not a PSA. It's we the people. Hey, this is what we're going through, guys, and maybe this is good for you too.
Yeah, and in a year when we're looking at an election year and lots of intense feelings and arguments and strife, what better time to resolve to just get outdoors, right? And so those things that ground us are when we focus intently, a meditation of sorts, and there's all sorts of different ways to meditate out there. If it's fishing, right? Come to the river. I can talk about what we've got in Columbia. the Saluda River holds trout, which is unusual for something in the Midlands. It's normally too hot, but because the river is dam released, the water's coming from low in Lake Murray and remains in the 50-degree.
We have a lot of fishermen that go to Columbia.
Right? So we've got trout. That fly fishing is a form of meditation, as in any fishing. You know, your focus narrows. When I was working with Michael, learning glass these past few days, focusing on the line and getting that piece together, that shuts out everything else, all those distractions. It's a form of meditation, getting that right, as can be kayaking, as can be your run, as can be bird watching, or simply sitting on that bench, quieting everything else. It works.
There's a lot of power to that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And no pharmaceutical involvement.
No. And I get to be the person that helps with all that. I can share, you know, where our best places are.
Dr. Karen.
Right. But really, there are plenty of resources online for parks around, you know, our trail finders and state park apps. They're good.
I said something in jest there, but I think it's true, though, that idea that this notion of mindfulness, connecting with that's what everything you're talking about. It is to that. I consider it to be at that very high level of professional service, just like a doctor prescription, right?
Well, and some doctors in some practices are now prescribing time outdoors. You know, it's proven this is not nonsense, that time outdoors is really good for people. And, you know, certainly a lot of our healthcare systems and hospitals will partner with parks for this purpose. But I would love to see more and more physicians. We have a physician in Columbia who holds a monthly walk with a doc at the Saluda River Walk.
So you go walk with him?
She hosts this and join in, and it's just a healthy get together and walk. People will often, if they're hesitant with time outdoors, and if you're listening to this and thinking, well, I should, you know, grab a friend, because sometimes if you make a commitment to your friend, you're actually more likely to hold that than you'll cheat on yourself. I'll sleep in. But if you're going to meet your friend at 8 o'clock, you can't stand her up, right? You can't stand him up. You will honor that commitment if you're doing it with somebody.
And you're getting better together then, right?
Exactly.
Maybe that's the mandate, right? Maybe that's the mandate of all of our park systems, and you know, the Columbia, South Carolina, which I contend is absolutely the hottest place on earth at certain times of the summer, and only certain things can happen there that can happen nowhere else. And being able to visit during that time and put your feet beside the water
and get cold
and get.
Right?
Can you?
Well, Columbia is famously hot. That was our branding a few years ago.
Right.
Surprisingly cool. We've moved on from that. But you know, that came from the old adage that the only thing separating us from hell in July was the screen door. Right. And that was a crowdsourced slogan, and everybody was coming famously hot.
Right.
It's true. And we are pretty warm in August.
Right.
But the neat thing is, remember that Saluda River water is running in the upper 50-degree range year-round, and if you go jump in, it will take your breath away. It's cold. Even walking beside it with the air coming off feels like natural air conditioning. It's a gift. It is fabulous. And
how many people discover that? I mean, that's got to be an aha moment when you see people experience that, and you're coming from this rather warm experience, and you feel this refreshing nature thing.
Well, the locals know, and we've got river outfitters who are putting scores and hundreds of people on the river to float on summer weeks too. It used to be a well-kept secret, but I don't know if it's so secret anymore. But you were saying Columbia's hot. You're right, but we have some really cool places.
Right.
And when you're done, get in the air conditioning and go to a restaurant. We've got some great stuff.
Oh, you have fantastic food down there.
We do.
I love Columbia, and I mean the hot months are the hot months. That's fine. Who was it? Wade Hampton, you know, and during the summer, the summer they would go up to High Hamptons in North Carolina. Well, that was the culture and how people would.
Absolutely.
But they were most.
But even from Charleston, Somerville, you just get away from the low country.
It was a lifestyle. So yes, the heat was part of it, but it was a way of being. I believe that, and I have friends still, and much more in their senior time now. But in hearing the stories of, the foundation, because they're descendants of the people who formed Conway and parts of South Carolina, and when I look at their style historically, I look at their history journals, and I hear their stories about how families would travel and the experiences that they would have, and how it was all documented. Karen, they were so much into mindfulness. I mean, as far as that idea of being in the moment, of capturing, of feeling what was there, it was all about that experience, right? I mean, they were people with means, and they could go do these things.
Sure.
But other people can't. But there was that. They didn't call it that, but they were documenting nature. I've looked at journals that have leaves in it that are 150 years old, because this 100-year-old person I'm talking to, when she was a child, she went and they collected leaves, and they're there. You say, well, this one came from, and it was always somewhere.
The study of nature was respected, and reading Bartram's journal was things like that, looking back at the naturalists and what they were exploring, and then connecting yourself with that knowledge was really important.
So is that not as popular as it once was?
I think not, but it's morphed, and here's look at technology. It's done so much for us, and to some degree it's isolated, but there's other ways that technology and citizen science have really boosted awareness. So when you look at, for instance, the Merlin app and iBird, and the number of people that are watching and connecting, and this really boomed in the pandemic, but as people got into birding, when you look at and they're logging their sightings on iBird in such a way that you can now watch migrations in the spring and the fall. You've got birds that are traveling, for thousands of miles, and you can see that migration in real time.
That's exciting.
It is.
That's really exciting.
Technology in the study of naturalism, all of this has evolved. Some of us are pulling out Google Lens or iNaturalist, and where it's, did I see, this, right? We've got our Rocky Shoals spider lilies are blooming right now here in the May, but what's blooming? It's trout lilies are starting to pop here, So the technology can help with reconnecting to some degree. I had an experience with the cicadas. It was during the COVID era when it first started, and because my approach on storytelling has always been, well, let me find an authority. But sometimes finding the foremost authority on something, well, it's not going to be quick, because they're either in class, they're doing off at a lecture, traveling the world. Yeah. Well, during that time, people weren't doing a whole lot of that. So we had an immersion of brood number 7, the cicadas, and in this area, and they started coming out. And I said, and I was out taking pictures. We weren't filming stuff because everything, those things weren't happening. So I just submerged myself into what I had access to. And I was like, well, I wonder. I got more curious about the cicadas. And these weren't the big ones that are, this is where, millions of them are emerging, and you hear them for weeks. And so I did some research and found an authority, and I reached out, and it was at a university. I fully expected not to get him on the phone. I called. I left him a message. Within 30 minutes, he called me back. Yeah. And we did an interview. We talked about it. And then, as it turns out, exactly as you say, there is a citizenry program of people that are taking pictures and documenting when these broods are appearing. I mean, literally when they start happening, there are people that are there on location, and and then that goes into their database. Yeah. So they have a much more accurate reporting of when things are happening. Sure. And we talked. We did a podcast with him, and it was fascinating.
And then we talk every 3 or 4 months now. How the cicadas.
How fun!
But it is.
And we're going to have another good cicada year coming up, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, somebody's always having a good cicada year.
True.
This depends upon where they're emerging.
But it's and one of the neat things too is then watching the kites, right?
Oh.
The Mississippi kites come back to our area June,
That's
May,
right.
and they're up there soaring around.
They're doing their thing.
Cicadas are a favorite snack.
That's
And
right.
dragonflies.
That's exactly right. And then we've got the monarch butterfly migratory patterns to Mexico and back and forth, and they go to the Outer Banks, and it's just so. And you're right. Technology is what's made that more accessible for someone like me and any citizen.
But for the citizen scientist who has to go out and is trying to capture that, there's another moment of reflection, because you're going to have to sit in a grassy spot and watch for a while and just be quiet.
That's right. While I went out on my trees, I took pictures of all these. I uploaded them. I said, "Here's my contribution." I did video. I went out into the woods and I recorded the sounds.
Yeah.
With a really good recorder, and I just listened. I just listened to them. I don't know if it's whether or not talk. Well, they're mating. That's what they're doing. They're putting that message out there. But I didn't know that. But then I learned that, and I was like, well, there's a reason for everything.
Well, and all the messages are synchronous fireflies at Congaree National Park, right?
That's right.
That's gotten so popular that it's now a lottery system. I think our lottery's open right now for that. But things like that. Sometimes just that little bit of awareness is enough to make some. I want to see that, and hopefully, as people get outdoors, then they'll find something that lights them up and connect with it.
I like that, but it makes us better no matter what.
Absolutely,
it makes us better.
We are part of a much larger whole, and we need to remember that.
Do our part. Do our part. Karen, this has been great.
Why, thank you.
I would imagine those who are still listening are fascinated with the topic, and those who were not have long since gone to sleep. But for me, that's okay, because I think this is worth talking about.
Absolutely. And if you are still listening, I really encourage you to come visit Columbia, South Carolina. The Saluda River Walk at 650 Candy Lane is spectacular. Make sure you walk downstream to the Boyd Island Sanctuary, where the Darnell and Susan Boyd Foundation has installed some sculptures. Wonderful, wonderful outing. Come spend some time with us. You won't be sad.
That's great. Thanks, Karen.
My pleasure.
See you on the trail.
Yay.
Thanks for listening to the Life in the Carolinas podcast. If you enjoyed your time with us, please visit the show's website at lifeinthecarolinas.com. Join our mailing list, and we'll keep you updated every week on what we have coming up and other interesting things around the Carolinas. We value you as a podcast subscriber. We'll see you next week. And remember what Carl says, it's never a bad time for a good story.